Hey everyone, Chef Mary here with some exciting news. We're making cookies today. But these aren't just any cookies. These are my sister's homemade Oreo chocolate chip cookies. Now for me, these cookies are equal parts delicious and sentimental, with the molten chocolate chips crackling at the surface of the golden baked dough and the warm cream from the Oreos peeking out from in between its crushed cookie counterpart. Now, I definitely don't have my sister's touch, but I'm still gonna try my hand at preparing these cookies. So, I'm gonna get to baking, but in the meantime, I've prepared a little history on these cookies to keep you entertained. So stay tuned. These cookies are definitely a homemade staple in my house now. But lately, I've been thinking about what it really means to make a homemade dessert. Do my sister's cookies really count as homemade when the key ingredients are industrialized products? In order to answer these questions, I will explore the intricate relationships between home cooking, gender, and how the perceptions of these roles have changed in response to historical events and industrial campaigns, namely Betty Crocker. First, let's get into the relationship of women and baking. Spoiler alert, women were constantly expected to bake for their families. And if you don't believe me, just look for yourself.
Honey, when was the last time you baked a cake?
Obviously, this type of entitlement isn't necessarily the norm today, but for the majority of history, home cooking had been the responsibility of the woman. Essentially, if it weren't for women as homemakers, families didn't eat, or have clean laundry, made beds, or clean houses. During times of crisis like World War II and the Great Depression, anxieties among women grew significantly as it was becoming harder to provide delicious homemade food for their families during what would become intense dime-stretching years. This is where Betty Crocker enters the scene.
I'm Betty Crocker, and I promise you a perfect cake every time you bake.
In the midst of these anxieties, Betty Crocker was born when the advertising department of a Minneapolis flour company, Washburn Crosby, determined their customers would be best served by responses signed by a woman. The decision to use a female persona was heavily influenced by the company's understanding of women's authority in domestic science, and Crocker quickly became a national icon for the home economist. With her meal planning advice and her cake recipes, Crocker was able to guide American women through the Great Depression and World War II, encouraging them to continue to find joy in the baking processes, even during these periods of severe material restriction. Crocker's radio program became a respite of solace for women who recognized Crocker as someone who talked to them in their own language, a neighborly voice giving helpful neighborly advice. Additionally, Crocker made a point of praising the housewife's importance and emphasizing that good cooking was an achievement women should be proud of. Research studies conducted to assess the influence of Crocker over modern homemakers found that women considered Crocker to be a teacher, someone who understands the housewife, a mother figure, and someone who helps women enjoy their cooking and homemaking, among other positive aspects. By the end of the Second World War, the food industry had begun overhauling the very concept of cooking itself. Companies began advertising traditional kitchen chores such as cleaning vegetables, chopping, measuring, and mixing ingredients as old-fashioned. The new style of cooking meant opening boxes, combining the contents, and decorating the results. Not surprisingly, Crocker was at the forefront of this effort to re-educate homemakers, specifically with the introduction of box mixes. Betty Crocker called homemade cakes a real achievement in the art of cooking and the very symbol of home life in our country. However, she also knew that, for women, the stakes were high when it came to baking, as measurements needed to be precise and much could go wrong in the baking process. For this reason, General Mills launched the first Betty Crocker cake mix, ginger cake, then followed with devil's food cake and party mix. Crocker was so confident in the user-friendliness of her mixes that her slogan even guaranteed perfection. Check it out.
I guarantee a perfect cake every time you bake, cake after cake after cake.
Ads like these began to urge women to think of a cake mix not as an end in itself, but as the starting point for a burst of imagination. From this, we can see how baking homemade desserts became less of a burden and more like an exercise of creativity for the homemakers. The hardest part, precisely measuring out ingredients, was already done. More effort could be put into decorating, and homemakers could feel proud and accomplished of their work. Okay, so now that we've heard a little bit about the history of these homemade desserts, let's meet up with my sister and see what she has to say about her own perceptions of her cookies.
I guess I wouldn't really describe myself as a baker. I mostly just do it if I'm bored or feeling anxious or like I just want to do something creative and fun with my time. So the recipe just started out as like a normal chocolate chip recipe, and then one day I was like trying to make them and I realized that we were out of like the wrong brown sugar, so I had to like improvise, and everyone I gave it to was like, wow, these cookies are really good. So I was kind of like, maybe I should try and change other things that I think would be good. So that's when I started considering Oreos. Like, I've been making these cookies for so long that I kind of have like the basic recipe for the dough memorized, and it's like I follow that recipe. I don't change the dough. I feel like changing the dough would make the cookies maybe worse, but I like the creative input comes in with like the mix-ins. Obviously there's so many different kinds of like Oreo flavors now. I like to test like the different flavors instead of like changing the cookies to make them like better or worse. It's more just like doing different versions of them, but like the overall dough stays the same. I definitely do think it has sentimental value as a homemade dish, because like even though I use the commercial ingredients, so I'm not like just like going to the store and buying something pretty much pre-made, and I'm like taking the commercial ingredients and incorporating them in the recipe in a way that they're not usually meant to do. It's kind of the same as if like, I just went to the store and bought flour and was using it in the dough. It's just another ingredient kind of to me. They're still homemade and I put a lot of effort into them.
Hey, welcome back. And perfect timing too. The cookies are just about done. Okay, so they look great and they smell great too. But now, the moment we've all been waiting for, the taste test. Yep, just as I suspected. My sisters are still better, but these are pretty close. Anyways, that's all I have. Thanks for watching.
Bake a Betty Crocker cake right now. Perfect every time.